Hi everyone, we're the Book Cougars, two middle-aged women on the hunt for a good read, and I'm Emily.
I'm Chris.
And I'm Shuly.
Hey, Shuly. It's so great to have you back again.
Thanks for having me back. I love it.
We're so excited to have Shuly here today to talk about a new collection that she's in. But first, Shuly, can you just remind people of your other books that are published?
Yes, I have. The first book I got published was a memoir called The Going and Goodbye. I have a short story collection called A Small Thing to Want, a little book called 52 Things I Wish I Could Have Told Myself When I Was 17, and then I have a poetry collection that just came out, Trouble Can Be So Beautiful at the Beginning.
And all of those books have been featured on various episodes of the Book Cougars, and we will put those links to those episodes down below, as they say in videos. Today we're here to talk about this collection, The Best of Brevity. It's an anthology, right?
It is an anthology published by Rose Metal Press in partnership with Brevity magazine and Dinty Moore, and they put together 20 groundbreaking years of Flash nonfiction. And so if anybody's not familiar with Brevity, Brevity magazine is an online magazine that is probably the best known site, or at least the best known that I know, that publishes only Flash nonfiction. And so it's kind of my go-to and most people's go-to when they want to read Flash nonfiction.
Awesome. And Rose Metal Press, as listeners may remember, or viewers, I guess in this case, that was co-founded by Kathleen Rooney, who's also been our guest and is a novelist and short story writer, I guess.
And poet,
actually. And poet, yeah. Yes. Yeah.
She's all of those things, just like Shuly.
Yes.
So Shuly, I have to admit, I didn't really know what Flash nonfiction is. This is a great introduction to it. Can you tell us kind of what the definition of Flash nonfiction is?
Yeah, so if you take the two words Flash and nonfiction, Flash means short. So it's typically Flash, because there's Flash fiction too, and then there's Flash nonfiction. But Flash typically means 750 words or fewer. Some places think of Flash as 1,000 words or fewer. People vary on, what that number is that makes it short. But for brevity's sake, it's 750 words or fewer. And then the nonfiction part is true. So short, true stories is basically what Flash nonfiction is.
Yeah, and this collection is so interesting. I mean, there are all different kinds in here, and some are really short. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's amazing what people can distill in a few words. And then some, I think, do hover more towards that 750 to 1,000. They're longer.
That's true. Yeah, there are probably some that do hit the 750 mark. And really, I mean, Flash nonfiction really varies, but always it's about something that's kind of more urgent than like a longer short story, or especially a novel. In a novel, and even a short story, you have time to sort of walk up to the story. And in Flash, you don't. You are there, it's immediate, and there's a sense of urgency. And I don't mean urgency in the sense of like it's always about like a fire or something like that, but there's an urgency in terms of it being in the moment.
Yeah, and it really draws you in because of that. So I found myself, I've been kind of dipping around in this anthology, and I get sucked into every story I pick up. And just so, like a regular short story, that's like 5,000 words. I've heard like 5,000 to 7,000 or so. So 750 words, like just in terms of the difference in those word counts. It's amazing that writers can get you so sucked in and hold your attention. And then and some of them leave me wanting a lot more, and others I'm like, okay, that's good.
Yeah, one of my favorite pieces, which is not in this anthology, but was published by Brevity, and I use it in my memoir personal essay class, is called Swerve by Brenda Miller. And it is, I think, 2 paragraphs long. It is short, and it is one of the best Flash nonfiction pieces I've ever read. So yes, length doesn't necessarily determine. I mean, you can have this short piece that really just resonates with you and sticks with you.
Now, is Brevity, Shuly, if you're not, I mean, we really do recommend that folks buy a copy of this, and we'll put a link to how to purchase this down below. But If you want to read Flash Nonfiction on Brevity, do you have to pay for that and have a subscription? Can you just go to the site?
No, it's a great site. They publish, yes, so it's free, available to anyone. They publish 3 times a year. They publish 16 pieces 3 times a year. So as a person who tries to get into Brevity, it's really hard to get into because they receive a lot of submissions. So they publish 3 times a year. And then they also have, for teachers or anybody running workshops, they have a great craft section on the craft of nonfiction and on teaching it. And so they have teachers who've used like Swerve by Brenda Miller and might go, this is how I taught this particular essay, so that other teachers can learn on how to teach that particular essay. So it's a ton of information. You hear all the time about teachers using the site to teach the works. And I certainly do. I use a lot of Brevity pieces in my workshops.
That's great. And thank you for mentioning too that they publish X amount of stories 3 times a year, because I think sometimes when people hear that something is an online magazine, they think that there are no standards or that stories don't go through a process. So thanks for mentioning that. I think the internet and online magazines have changed a lot in that regard, that they are curating a lot more than they used to, maybe.
They have. And then they also have an ongoing blog that publishes daily on mostly can be writing in general or nonfiction. They don't publish articles on writing poetry, for example, but they could publish something generally on writing. So it's a great blog. I subscribe to that too, and it's free.
Great. Can we talk about your piece in this anthology?
Yes.
Because this piece appears both in this anthology and in your poetry collection that you mentioned.
True. That is true. So it's a little unusual. I wrote it as a poem originally when I first wrote it. I was in my hometown of Yellow Springs when the incident I write about happened. I experienced an incident, and I went immediately to the coffee shop where I love to write, and I sat down and just wrote it. I mean, it just came out of me, and I wrote it as a poem. I'd been trying to get into Brevity for years, literally years, had gotten a bunch of rejections. I would think a piece was perfect for Brevity, and then it would get rejected. But I looked at this piece after I wrote it and I thought, what if I take out all the line breaks? Because it was not a prose poem. It had, line breaks. And I looked at it and I thought, I'm going to try. So I took out all the line breaks, submitted it to Brevity. And when I got the acceptance, I literally ran around screaming in my house. I hope no neighbors heard me. But I was thrilled because I'd been trying so hard. Now, there is really a fine line sometimes between a prose poem and flash nonfiction. I would say that my poetry often is telling a story. So I don't write poems that are like, snow, red truck, like not poems like that. That's not my style. My poems are mostly story driven. And so it makes sense that it would fit into something that is story driven, that would be flash nonfiction. So, and then for my poetry collection, I put back in the line breaks and put it in my poetry collection.
Yeah, that was amazing to read both in both forms. And it really made me understand when people say something is like prose poetry. Mm-hmm. I've heard people say that before, and I was like, oh, that doesn't sound very enticing to read for me. But now I get it. I understand it. It's not what I had in my mind, which we don't want to go there.
I think most of us could say that about our minds, Chris. I'm like, if people knew how I spent time in my mind. So Shuly and listeners and viewers, you might be able to tell from this conversation, knows a lot about writing. And we want to let people know about an upcoming workshop that you have. Can you tell people about that?
Sure, I'd love to. So I love nonfiction in general, personal essays, memoir. And one of the things I love is flash nonfiction. It's a really unique form, and it can really vary. I mean, when you read this anthology, it really is all over the map. You think, oh, everything's short. It's probably all the same. No, they're so different in terms of structure. And so I do an introduction to flash nonfiction where we read 4 pieces. I send them ahead of time and to the participants so that they can read them. And then we discuss them and we pull out the techniques that the writers are using so that if the participants want to write their own, they've now pulled out these techniques and can learn from them and write their own using the same techniques. And we look at 4 very different pieces. One has sections, one is just a scene, they're all really different and have their own points. So it is on May 5th. I give it through Press 53. It's on Wednesday, May 5th from 6:30 to 8, an introduction to Flash Nonfiction. I think it's called Moments That Matter.
Awesome. And it's only $30. And I'm signed up for it. So if you want to join me, join Shuly. She's a great teacher. I've done online workshops with her before, so I highly recommend it. And for $30, I think that's a really excellent value.
Thank you. I love teaching it. It's been really fun to teach.
I also think, I took a previous workshop that you did with Flash Nonfiction. I've also now am a graduate of your Memoir, an essay writing workshop. And I can say that it also just makes you a better reader to take these workshops. I really understand what I'm reading, on a different level. And sometimes I think that's great. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish I didn't have all this knowledge now. But for the most part, I'm very glad, Shuly, and thankful for you. I feel like you're a fantastic teacher.
Thank you. And the thing that's great about Flash Nonfiction is if you're busy, it's just a short piece and you don't have to feel like, oh, I can't finish it. Usually, you can finish it in just a couple of minutes right before you go to bed. If you're waiting in line, they're just great ways to just read something short that's an interesting piece.
Yeah, totally.
That's a really good point.
Could you just, I know we're trying to not talk for a whole hour here, but can you talk a little bit about, is there a beginning, a middle, and an end in Flash fiction pieces, or does that completely vary on the intention?
It completely varies on the pieces. I'm thinking of one piece that I teach that is Natalie Lima Snowbound. It's a great piece published in Brevity, and it's got 5 sections. And so it definitely has a beginning, kind of middle, and end. But there are other pieces like Swerve that I mentioned by Brenda Miller, where you're right in it. I guess you could call it a beginning. It's like beginning end. So it really depends on the piece. They really vary so much. And that's what's fun about the form is you think, like I said, it's all going to be the same, but it really, other than the length, there's just so many ways to go and so many different things you can do in your piece of writing. So it's all over the map.
That's great. And that's what makes reading an anthology like The Best of Brevity really interesting, because they are all different.
Yeah, buy it, put it on your nightstand.
That's right.
Read 1 or 2 every night before bed. We highly recommend it. Thanks so much for stopping by, Shuly.
Yes, I loved it. And I love Flash Nonfiction, so read it.